Okay, we're here with head rowing coach Matt Weise talking about the Jacks season opening regatta this past weekend out in Sacramento, hosted by Sac State. The Jacks faced off in a double duel against St. Mary's and the host Hornets. Had some good results, a good opener to the season. Just kind of give us some details on what your thoughts were coming off of that.
Yeah, they learned, which is what you're looking for early on, right? What can you respond, figure out what the holes in your game are, and I think that was very evident, which is nice. There's plenty for us to do during the rest of the season, but they also performed really well. They're very consistent. Kind of every quarter of the race, they were pretty consistent with their numbers, and that does not always happen early in the season. So I thought the physical piece of it, the way that they rode, was pretty good. I think there's certainly some things that we can work on as a team and as individual boats that we learned, and we'll now hopefully apply that to this coming weekend.
Something I noticed was obviously this is one of those races where you're racing in the morning and then you race later on in the afternoon. Was there kind of is that a normal thing for you guys to do in general? And two, how much adjustment did you kind of make between those two sessions?
Yeah, so early season, yes, we try to race multiple times. What's happening when we go to Seattle is we race, they turn around and they race the other direction. So it's they have a fairly 15, 20 minute gap in between, but they're going to race twice there as well. And most of it is just so you can assess how you're doing and learn from it and then try it right away to the next thing. So that's what we did in the morning, particularly the 4 and the novice 8. Made a couple of rhythm adjustments. The novice 8 just went a little harder, like they got into the race. And that's something they have to learn as a new rower, right? Is how hard can I go? The first one you're a little fearful on because you're not sure how it's going to go. And then they took some appropriate risks in the second one. The varsity 8 had a better start. So coming off the start line, their first race, second race, they got a little flustered. And once you get the boat out of rhythm, it's hard to get it back in. And they didn't really have a great response rhythm-wise. And so I think they fell behind earlier than they anticipated in that race.
And I saw as well you raced 2 different V4 squads. And you had a little bit of switching up between those boats, between the morning and the afternoon. Just kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so part of it is we're still deciding on who sits where, right? So, and we use these competitions to help test who's making the boat go faster. And there's no better place to do that than when you're racing as opposed to practicing. So yeah, there were some personnel lineups and just to see who was moving better.
Awesome. And so going into this weekend, you're going to be up in Seattle, up at the Husky Open. And you're going to have the chance to see a couple of your GNAC foes. You're going to see Seattle Pacific up there, I believe, and Western Washington. Yes. Both really solid opponents. Just kind of talk about what your goals are heading into this weekend and kind of what the expectations are for these groups. As we are still fairly early in the season, but just what you're looking to see from them.
Well, it's exciting because it matters. Right? When you start racing your Division II opponents, it matters how well you do. So there's that sense of it almost has a championship feel on it, and you get to deal with nerves, you get to deal with the emotions of that, and try to figure out how do you use that to your advantage. So this is nice because we get to see them all again. So there is that feel, but not necessarily. If we kind of mess it up, you still have another chance. But I think they can really seize on the day and kind of figure out how to make their boats work when they're really elevated emotionally, and I think that'll be a fun test for them.
Going back to Sac State, I mean, I had alluded to it, but I wanted to, obviously they had pushed this back. There were kind of maybe two questions for me with that. The first being obviously like inclement weather conditions, and I had read that I believe that Sac State said that the estimate at the time of last week was 10,000 over the threshold for cubic centimeters, I believe, for allowing boats. So, I mean, obviously just coming out of that, I'm sure it was fun. But I mean, how much of that maybe was residual? How much of that was still a factor?
Well, it was interesting. We didn't know if we were going to race until we were traveling down there Friday. So it was one of those where there's so much water there that they were trying to drop and see where the water level drops. And it's a dammed lake. So they have to shut off some of the gates to slow down the flow so that it's safe enough for boats to go out. So that didn't happen until Friday afternoon. And so it for us, it didn't matter because we were traveling. But what happened on Saturday is, especially the morning race, it was actually dropping. It was getting calmer as it went throughout the day. It got slower and slower. The flow did. So the first race was pretty fast. But the beauty of rowing on Humboldt Bay is we get to do that every day with the tides. So it is very similar to rowing with the tide or against the tide. And this would have been with the tide. So for the rowers, it wasn't a whole lot different than what we normally do.
And I mean, to that same point, I mean, what is the athletic challenge of, I think one of the things we talked about leading up to the original scheduled Sac State meet was, it's a lot of prep, it's year-round prep, and now's a chance to put it together. What is it like when you kind of stall out for a sec, you have to wait an extra week and then maybe re-amp up? I mean, what is it like now?
It was a lot of adversity in the team because we didn't know. Like, we didn't know if we were trying to do travel arrangements, try to get them all set up, and we didn't know if we were racing. So we were trying to get excited again, but almost tentatively excited, right? So it was a strange week, but I thought they did a good job. And it was spring break week, so we were training anyway. We're going to put a lot of meters in that week anyway. So I don't think it was that problematic. The hard part is we now have 4 straight weekends of racing, and that's what we didn't have a quick break after that. So it'll be interesting. They're having a really good week this week. But it's a quick turnaround going back to Seattle, and I think they're all energized by that trip. So they've been pretty locked in.
And I mean, maybe to that same point, we were just we've been speaking with the track team about them going to Hayward. It feels like maybe there's a bit of a parallel, especially just being on the West Coast as far as going up to Seattle and University of Washington. I'm a Seattle native. I know the importance. I know kind of even just some of the cultural significance of you see boaters out there, rowers out there every single day. Like I would pass over it growing up with it, whether it would be. So there's this, what is it like to kind of, and maybe there's a compare and contrast factor to that, but what is it like to kind of be in that situation where it feels like there's a lot of maybe weight and a lot of opportunity and it's a fun chance to really be in an environment along the best?
Well, the course is neat. There's a bridge that goes over the 3/4, the 1,500 meter mark. So it'll be different for them. I think it'll be a lot of fun. It's an energy. I think really the Mountain Lake Cut is fairly narrow, so there's a lot of energy when the boats are close together. It's going to be a really fun event for them, I think, to go to. So and Seattle is there's a lot of rowing there, so it's nice. There should be a lot of people on shore, which doesn't always happen in rowing, right? So hopefully there'll be some crowds and some cheering and some things that they don't normally get at a normal rowing race.
And is there an element, I mean, again, not to just recycle everything from track, but I think there's this similar athletic strategy of you get to have this sort of early, maybe high intensity stress, something that can prep you for potentially things like conference championships, high stakes events later in the season. How do you try and manage that as a coach of letting them go through it, let them feel those nerves, manage it, and then also use it for later in the season?
Part of it, I heard Sue Enquist, who I think was the UCLA softball coach years ago. She gave a speech at the NCAA championships one year. She said, everybody's going to have butterflies, but the winning teams make those butterflies fly in formation. So it's a matter of everyone's going to be nerves are not a bad thing, right? It's just raw energy. It's a matter of how are you going to direct it into something that's works. That's something that makes the boat go faster. And so, you want to get in these situations. You can't create these in practice. It's just an impossible thing to create that kind of feel. So it's great to go to these races because they do have to learn how to deal with those nerves. So when you get to championship time, they can hopefully direct it a little better.
Awesome. Thank you, Coach.
Sure.
Thank you, Coach.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to send Shelly in.